think that one of the most difficult tasks in making garments is setting in a sleeve. It's so easy to get it wrong, and there's lots of things that can trip you up. So my tutorial today is how to set in a sleeve. Hi, this is Jen and you're at Artisan Stitch. Set-in sleeves are found in more formal garments such as ladies' tops and dresses, and of course jackets and coats. It can be very difficult to get the balance, what's called the balance of the sleeve correct. Get a nice sleeve head or sleeve cap sitting across the shoulder and a nice smooth curve down the back of the arm. Now we don't want to see any little tucks or gathers. Yeah, it's not a puff sleeve or a gather sleeve. Set-in sleeve is very specific. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. Now this is my little model, little half-size mannequin, which is quite handy to show these techniques. And I'm also going to be working on a miniature half-sized garment today. I've got my garment to the stage where I'm ready to put the sleeves in. So I've done all the neck, I've got the neck facing in. I have joined the side seams of the garment and I've neatened the edges with my overlocker and I've pressed them open. Now because this is a miniature garment for sample purposes, my seam allowances are going to be 1 centimetre, that's 3/8 of an inch. But if you were using a commercial paper pattern, your seam allowances would more likely be 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimetres. So there we go. I also have cut my 2 sleeves. Now it's very important when you're working with sleeves that you watch that you get a mirror image pair and not 2 of the same. So I've cut them, either right sides together or wrong sides together. And that doesn't matter, but when you are cutting your sleeves, it's a good idea to make sure that you add your notches. Now you will always have 1 notch on the front and a double notch on the back, and your garment would usually have the same, although I see I've not put my notches on the garment. So I'll mark those on with chalk before I start. Also, quite often sleeve patterns will have a dot at the top of the sleeve head that goes to be matched with the shoulder seam, and that helps you get your sleeve in the correct position. So I have started ease stitching, E-E-S-E, ease stitching around the top of my sleeve head here. Now if your seam allowance is 1 centimetre, as mine is, I've done my ease stitching about 7mm in from the edge and about 12mm. So that's about 2mm either side of your stitching line. And just to recap, 1 centimetre is 3/8 of an inch. Now the 2 rows of ease stitching help you draw the fabric up evenly, and basically we have from the notch to the top, we have a slightly uneven amount of fabric. There's more fabric in the sleeve head than there is in the armhole of the garment, and the ease stitching will help us draw that extra fabric up, and actually that is what creates the curved shape of the sleeve to sit round the shoulder. So I'm going to just finish off by doing the rest of the ease stitching on my second sleeve. Key to accurate and straight stitching is to follow your seam lines on your sewing machine. So because I want to stitch the sleeve in using my 10mm, 1 centimetre mark or 3/8, I want my ease stitching to be either side of that. So I have a 2/8 mark there and a 4/8 mark there. That's probably what I would want to use for my ease stitching, or the metric equivalent. So I'm just going to go ahead now and do my ease stitching, and I'm doing it now because it's far easier to do your ease stitching when your sleeve is still flat. So you see I'm keeping my fabric aligned to my 2/8 mark. This is the outer row of ease stitching. Just gradually turning the fabric, keeping the fabric moving. I've done that between the 2 notches around the cap of the sleeve. And we're going to do the other row. And I'm using bright contrasting thread today, obviously, for filming purposes, but you would be using your normal matching thread. So second row of ease stitching round about the 12mm mark, or the 4/8, half an inch. Again, I'm following the edge of the fabric to get a nice, smooth and even stitch. I should say my stitch length is 2.5mm. I think that's about 10 stitches to the inch in old money. So it's just your regular stitch size you would use for making up the garment. It's not a long stitch such as you'd use for gathering. Because we don't want gathers, we don't want little tucks and gathers in our sleeve. Right, now I've done that. So now I am going to join the underarm seams of my sleeves. Stitching at each end of the seam. Right sides together, of course. Right, I'm just going to tidy those up, give them a press, and press these seams open as well. When I'm doing sleeves, I usually press both the underarm seams on the sleeves and the side seams of the garment open to avoid bulk underneath the arm. In case you're wondering what machine I'm using today, it's my Husqvarna Emerald 118. These are my teaching machines in my studio. I love them. Right, so I have my garment wrong sides facing out. I have my sleeves turned right side out. Now, this is where you could end up getting the left sleeve in the right armhole, or you may even have made two left sleeves. So it's pretty difficult to do when you have fabric like this which has one obvious right side, but when you're working with fabric where it's difficult to determine which is the right and which is the wrong side, that's when the accidents can happen. So you can see I have a mirror image pair here. There's my notches, back notches on each side. So I have 2 different sleeves. So first armhole, let's start with this one. So I'm going to put the sleeve into the armhole. Now I want the sleeve which has the notch on the front. This is the front of the garment. There's my single notch. There's my double notch for the back. So it is this sleeve. So it goes in there, like so. And I'm going to take the underarm seam, if I can find it. These little threads are a bit annoying, but you can't cut them off yet. So I'm going to take my underarm seam of the garment, my underarm sleeve seam on the sleeve, put those two together. And if I pin through the seam, make sure it comes out on the seam on the garment. There we go, and that way you know that your seams are going to matching. Quilters will know what I mean. There we go. Then I'm going to work my way around to the notch. Now, satin sleeves are usually a one-to-one relationship round under the arm. That is, there's the same amount of fabric in the sleeve as there is in the armhole. So from the underarm to your front notch. That's fine, so I'm going to pin there. I'm also going to pin this because we have two slightly opposing curves, which will try to run away from each other. So I'm going to pop a pin in there as well. Then I'm going to work round to the back notch. So again, there's my back notch. Double notch matched to the garment. And I'm going to pin there, and probably one in here too. Right. Now the next point I'm looking for is that little dot at the top of the shoulder, top of the sleeve there, and that needs to go to the shoulder seam. I've got a real hodgepodge of pins here. And again, I'm just going to match that dot, put my pin through, make sure it lies along the seam. Right, so that's my sleeve pinned in place. Now what you'll notice, hopefully, you may not have noticed, I've got more fabric in these two parts. So that's from the shoulder down to the back, and from the top of the shoulder down to the middle of the front. There's more fabric here. So that's when we need to do our easing, hence the e-stitching. So I'm going to grab these threads. Now when you're e-stitching, or gathering for that matter, only pull one set of threads, so either the ones on the top or the ones on the bottom. That's actually my top threads, so those are the bobbin ones, but make sure you only pull one set, 'cause if you pull both top and bobbin threads together, you'll lock your stitches so tight that they won't be able to move. But I'm going to pull both threads, both sets of lines together. And see that I'm just using my fingers to pull and then distribute that extra fabric. It doesn't take much. And as I mentioned, this is not a gathered or a puffed sleeve. And just taking that extra around up to the shoulder. I just keep doing that until my sleeve is now the same length. The section is now the same length as the garment. It doesn't take much. That's just about there, I think. Now all I'm going to do now is just distribute this easing. So I repeat, this is easing, not gathering. And there we go. You can see we've got a little bit extra fabric in there. Now that's sitting in there quite nicely. So I'm just going to pin it, I think, a little bit more gathering up towards the top. Sorry, I've just used that G word, haven't I? A little bit more easing towards the top. There we go. See what I mean about the pins? It's not a pin, that's a harpoon. There we go. My favourite pins are about 1.25 inches, and I think that's 38mm with little plastic tops, and then you can find them when you drop them in the carpet. Now I'm going to pin quite closely. You can see I'm putting in my pins at 90 degrees to the seam. And maybe a pin every half an inch or so. Now, something else that you may have noticed happening is the sleeve wants to slip away and slide out the way. So I'm keeping it tucked well down so my edges are level. And I'll need to make sure that I watch that as I'm sewing. Right, that's that bit pinned in. I think one there. Now you notice I haven't got any tucks or gathers or little, little pinched bits of fabric. It's just all nice and smooth. And pin there. Now come round to the front. I'm just going to repeat that process. Here I've got this extra fabric. So I don't want to use those threads, I'll pop those back in. These ones, there's my front notch, so grab them. Make sure obviously you use good quality thread, which you should be doing anyway, but if you use poor quality thread it could snap and you'd have to start the whole process again. So again, I'm just distributing that excess fabric around until that's about it there. Again, little pinched bit here. Smooth that out. And again, see how this is wanting to slip out the way, so push it back down. Too big. It's definitely worth taking your time over this. There's nothing which is a worse red flag to a homemade garment than a scruffy sleeve. And nothing makes a garment more than a nicely set-in sleeve. Right, I'm happy with that. So that's my sleeve ready for stitching. Right. Because I'm working in such a small scale, this isn't going to go over my free arm. Well, it will just, but it's a bit awkward. So I'm actually just going to be working from, just have it on the top of the machine. So I like to sew from the sleeve side rather than the garment side. I want to see what's happening to all this fabric inside. That way, if any little tucks of fabric start to get to ride up, I can see what's happening and be on top of it. So any pins on the underside of the fabric, I'm going to move to the top. Again, you don't want pins on the underside because they can get caught in your feed dogs. Pins always on the top of the fabric. Right, now I like to start at the front notch and work my way around under the arm first. This is the easy bit, so do the easy bit first. And again, my seam allowance is 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. Purely because I'm working on my tiny little miniature garment size, but if this was a regular person-sized garment, it would probably be 5/8 or 1.5. Right, so I'm going to do a little bit back stitch. And so I'm working my way around stitching in between the existing rows of ease stitching, removing pins as I go. I'm also maintaining the 1 centimetre seam allowance, keeping the outer raw edges together and avoiding any build-up of fabric which can create little tucks. And now back to my starting point. Again, so I can overlap that stitching and a little bit reverse. Right, so let's have a look. So from the inside, you can see 3 rows of stitching here, but I'm looking at the middle row. There's no tucks, no gathers of fabric, no little bulges. Again, you also need to check that you haven't caught anything in underneath. It's quite easy to catch in a bit like that underneath. Now on the shoulder seam I have actually pressed these towards the back together. Oops, look, I have caught some in. Right, what I'm going to do there, I'll just nick that with my quick unpick and re-stitch that little bit so it's flat. But that's all you need to do. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and put the second sleeve in. I'm going to fix that little bit there. I'm going to press them all up and I'll show you what I'm going to do after that. Having stitched both sleeves, I've come to my overlocker and I'm going to finish off the raw edges on the inside. So this is the underarm. So on this bit I'm going to trim this back to about 5 or 6 millimeters. That is, let me think, about a 1/4 inch, I think. Yeah, 6 millimeters is a 1/4 inch. So this is the bit under the arm, so it's going to be comfortable to wear. It's eliminating all the bulk. Again, I do not want to slice off part of my sleeve, so I'm being very careful. Just use this finger underneath, is making sure there's nothing that shouldn't be. Now as I come round to the upper part of the sleeve, I've gone back to my original 1 centimetre, and if you were using 1.5 centimetres or 5/8, I would stick to that because you want to keep all your seam allowance. So I'm not really trimming much off here, I'm just neatening the edges together. And if you want to know what sheet machine I'm using, it's my GK. There we go. No, there we go, there we go, it's my GK. Love this overlocker. Now I'm overlapping nice stitching. Don't want to trim off what I've already done, overlapping it and then chain off. And you can see under the arm I've trimmed it close, and around the shoulder area I've left the seam allowance much longer. So after overlocking, here we have the inside seam. You can see I've taken it right down on the underarm part of the seam and left it across the top of the shoulder. So if you press the seam allowances towards the sleeve, and they actually act like little mini shoulder pad. So if you can see, it gives you this sort of lovely shape where your sleeve's sticking out, so a bit like this one. There we go, that's actually your seam allowance is helping to hold that out. So that is how you do a satin sleeve. So if you've liked this video, please give me a thumbs up. Click the subscribe so you see all my other videos, and press that notification bell so you know when I've released a new video. Thank you for watching.